We are here today, ignited by an article entitled, What Many Priests No Longer Believe. The piece was written by today's guest, a prolific writer, producer, professor, broadcaster, and priest, Father Robert McTeigue. As it so happens, Father McTeigue rather energized my colleagues, Diana and Linda, both of whom wrote spirited responses to his article on the Chantworks website. I recommend all three. They are true crime accounts of the 1 hour a week many Catholics have in common, the Mass. Okay, maybe it's not illegal, but it sometimes feels injurious to the public and personal welfare of its witnesses, such as the composite priests of whom Father McTeigue writes, and many Catholics, including me. As said by my homeboy, Mark Twain, and beautifully quoted in Father McTeige's now infamous article, everyone complains about the weather, but no one does anything about it. Well, the time has come to do something about it. Father McTeigue, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you for your kind introduction. Glad to be of service today.
Reading your article about what's gone wrong with the typical parish's celebration of the Mass and my colleagues' responses, I thought of the story of the blind man and the elephant. You know, where each man feels a different part of the animal and defines the elephant according to his own experience. Personally, I most identify with the one who feels the side of the elephant and proclaims it's a wall. The Mass is now and forever the manifestation of Christ in the Eucharist, but these breaches of form and decorum that we must all mentally block out, whether on the altar or in the pews, well, that's my wall. You identified the goalpost in your article, that is adhering to the general instruction of the Roman Missal. Great start. But how can priests hold the line?
This is a really important question, and I make clear that St. Typicals is analogous to Garrison Keillor's Lake Wobegon on the Prairie Home Companion. It's a composite of many places. I plan to add more characters over time. You know, Father Cheerful, the pastor of St. Typicals, has an assistant called Father Stifled, and I hope to be writing more about this going forward. See, here's my basic premise. I want to draw an analogy between good preaching, good liturgy, and mortal sin. In my book on preaching, I say that good preaching is like mortal sin. Both require grave matter, sufficient reflection, and full consent of the will, and neither happens by accident. My contention that on most Sundays, at most of the typical parishes, the liturgy has been on autopilot for years and for decades. Nobody thinks about what they're doing or why they're doing it. But here's the basic agreement. Everybody has to show up. There's a collection, and then you get your liturgical proof of purchase. You put out one hand to get, as many younger Typicalians call it, the thing. And then you can leave. God owes you heaven. The lights are on for another week. And as long as it doesn't take very long and it's not too unpleasant, everybody is winning. This is simply not good for souls. And we need to talk about it. And what I found when I first published an article in Homiletic and Pastoral Review, there were a lot of folks who were indignant because I, as a priest, should be happy that people show up at all. And I'm here to provide drive-through, pain-free, sacramental service. That doesn't glorify God and it doesn't help souls, which is why I write and I continue to talk and write about these things.
There are so many moving parts in people to every Mass. Recognizing the size and depth of the challenge, name just 3 things that any priest might be able to do to begin turning the wheel of change.
All right, it's really very, very simple. Start by reading the general instruction of the Roman Missal. It's only 66 pages. I did a word search. The word silence appears 22 times. Yet, according to a lot of clergy and parishioners that I've met across the country, there seems to be the mandatory no silence law, that a Mass is like live radio. There must never be dead air. So at St. Typical's Parish, someone is either talking or singing, or someone is tinkling the keyboards, or they're strumming their cigar box banjo, but there must not be silence ever. And the anxiety is that if there's silence, not only has someone missed their lines, it might take too long. So we rush through as quickly. So read the general instruction of the Roman Missal. Number two, read the legislation regarding extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion. I have been a priest for 27 years, a Jesuit for almost 35. I've been around the world. I've been at masses in every conceivable circumstance. I have never once been at a mass where extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion were needed. When I know priests who were in a context during the reign of King COVID where they were allowed only 40 people in church, including the priest and the deacon, and the parish secretary scheduled two extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion because that's just what you do. And so we were going to have the anomaly of 10% of the congregation would be distributing communion. Well, that's just nonsense and an indication of a casual failure. And third, reread the legislation regarding communion in the hand and then just act accordingly. Just do those things which cost no money. And I think we would make very great steps forward.
I think those are brilliant. I can back that up, having
Thank you.
around the world as well. And what is with the silent thing? I understand. I'm going to add, I know in radio it's death.
Right.
Reading that. But at the same time, back in just right after talkies were invented in the movie industry, if you go back and listen to those movies, they don't allow any breath between lines.
Right.
Every single line is back to back. And probably the biggest issue is that silence can be deadly. It makes you think.
Well, yes. And, I was a university professor for many years, and I saw the growing addiction of students to their electronic devices, which has crushed their attention span and crushed their ability to have any meaningful kind of silence. But there are people who should really know better. Case in point. So I'm at St. Typical's. Brethren, to prepare ourselves to celebrate the sacred mysteries, let us first call to mind our sins. And then I do something amazing. I put my head down and I start to call to mind my sins, just like I called everyone else to do. The deacon looks over at me in horror because apparently this is the junior high school drama club and I've missed my line. Let us call to mind our sins. And he blurts out, "You were sent to heal the contract." And then you have to sit down with the deacon, and I'm drawing diagrams, and I got sock puppets to try to explain why this is a necessary and good thing. And he has never heard of such a thing. Been ordained a permanent deacon for years, and he's never heard of that. And I can repeat that illustration time and time again. And finally, people began to accept that's just Father's quirk. It's just Father's quirk. They could not understand why I would want any silence at all, which tells me that if the permanent deacon who has been serving at a parish for years doesn't know why there should be any silence ever, he certainly has not read the in general instruction of the Roman Missal, and that means that his pastor has not required him to read it. And it also makes me wonder when was the last time Father read it as well.
My husband and I call that Mass, the Broadway play.
Yes, yes. And then with the right kind of music, it becomes what I call Mass, the effeminate high school musical. And the lyrics are, oh, Jesus, ooh, 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 what would I do without you, who, lather, rinse, repeat. And it doesn't have to be that way. It's not required by the rite. In fact, it is forbidden by the right. But we've got business as usual so deeply ingrained for so long that a whole lot of people who should know better have no clue that anything is wrong.
Muscle memory.
Yes. Alas, alas.
Father McTeigue, what can ordinary Catholics do to support and encourage priests who want to bring Catholic beauty back to parish liturgies?
Well, become closed-minded, judgmental, and intolerant. Chesterton said that The human mouth is like the human mind. Both are meant to close down on something solid. There's nothing more solid than Christ's revelation to the church he founded. So start with that. Let's worship according to the mind of Christ. Let's be judgmental. Hey, some things are expressly forbidden, some things are expressly required according to the legislation of the church. Let's acknowledge this is out of bounds, this is in bounds, and then let's become intolerant. Let's become intolerant of banal music. Let's become intolerant of banal preaching. Let's become intolerant of liturgical abuses and casualness. Very simple illustration. The lector does the second reading and then takes the lectionary off the ambo, puts it to the side to make room for the deacon to place the book of the gospel. The lector does that even when there is no deacon and no book of the gospel, because that person was never taught the why. So this needs to be pointed out to Father Cheerful so that the lector doesn't unwittingly embarrass himself every Sunday. So people need to have polite, cheerful, well-documented, well-prepared meetings and saying, hey, this is how we understand what the church requires. This is what the church forbids. This is what we do. We're seeing a gap here. How can we help? I think that would be a good place to start.
That's excellent. In my other life, we turn businesses around. Process is the point. And it sounds like process has become cemented.
Right. In my book called Real Philosophy for Real People, there's McTeige's axiom, which states most institutions would rather die than admit that anyone ever made a mistake. So, for example, if you actually go to the legislation regarding the use of extraordinary ministers, which, by the way, has nothing to do with the misunderstood word of participation. If we just look at that legislation, oh my gosh, we've been abusing this office for years and years and years. Somebody's going to have to own up to that. Very simple illustration. I was concelebrating a mass when I was a new priest, and the main celebrant had told me in the sacristy, well, when it comes time to distribute Holy Communion, you can sit down because it's Tuesday, and Tuesday is Sally's day. And I said, no, I have the right and obligation to distribute the Eucharist. I confect it. And he said, well, how do you think Sally will feel? And I said, well, if you taught her properly, she'll feel just fine. But if you were too lazy to teach her properly, the church doesn't have to pay Sally's emotional bills because you were lazy. Now, I could talk that way priest to priest, but I think those kinds of conversations that we have cheated Christ and we've treated the church because we're lazy, and ultimately it's because we don't care. We don't. The Eucharist is a source and summit of our lives. That's why we give fathers sweat-stained polyester vestments from the 1970s, stemware from Home Depot as a chalice, and a table from IKEA as an altar. The Eucharist is a source and summit of our lives. That's why we tolerate banal preaching and ridiculously bad music, because the Eucharist is not the source and summit of our lives. So we have this illusion. Look, here's the conspiracy. I won't take long. I won't preach anything unpleasant. You give to the collection. We'll all get out of here in under an hour, and you'll get your liturgical proof of purchase. And it's a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy. And we have to have our come to Jesus moment, quite literally.
So let's say parishes change for the better. What can they expect for the pain?
Well, first of all, we should be faithful to Christ because he deserves it. And the fruits that come from that come later. But first of all, we have to tell the truth about Christ. He did reveal how he is to be worshiped, and the church has accumulated a lot of wisdom over the millennia, and we need to put that to use. That is our obligation. All right, so I believe that if we do that, then lives will be saved and souls will be saved and God will be glorified. We all get hysterical because our kids aren't going to church anymore, but we gave them no reason to. Right? If we're really going to be serious about just doing what it says on the page, just doing that, a lot of people are going to admit, we got to go to confession. We got to go to confession. We got to change how people are taught. And then when people start going to confession and start taking God seriously, then their lives will have to change. So I think that there would be very great good fruit. And then when you realize that Father is not bored as he's sleepwalking his way through what we call the source and summit of our lives, maybe some young man will say, hey, Father's taking that seriously. Maybe I want to do that too. So I think all sorts of good things would. And if we take God seriously, then we have to take seriously the people made in his image and likeness for whom he lived and died. All sorts of really good dominoes would fall. So, but it starts with worship.
Absolutely. Father McTeigue, riff for a bit on the relationship of Catholic beauty to priests and laity, please.
Oh, my goodness. Now, first of all, I'm not an artist. I'm a word guy. I can't draw a straight line with a ruler. I have family members who are artists. I'm not an artist. But we are made for the true, the good, and the beautiful. Uh, Aristotle said philosophy begins in wonder. Aquinas said the philosopher may be likened to the poet in this wise. Both are concerned with the marvelous. So we want to have churches where people gasp in awe. I once read a spiritual journal where the author prayed, Lord, let me live my life such that people will ask, if this be the servant, what be the master? When you step into a beautiful church, there's part of you that's lifted up. And finally, you want to say, I want to know the God who inspired this. Now, I've done masses in very simple settings, very extreme settings as a Jesuit missionary in the third world. And when I hear three thoughtful people chanting or a handful of thoughtful people singing polyphony, the fallen world passes away, and my heart and mind and heart are lifted towards the transcendent. And I find that thrilling, and candidly, in the sick world we live in, I find that healing as well. It's not that hard to chant. It's not that hard to sing polyphony. It's a simple act of the will and a little bit of homework, and that's all that it is. It's been my very great privilege to offer Mass at some really serious monasteries done by religious women. And when religious women, contemplatives, lay out the vestments, it's exquisite. It's like liturgical origami. They take the ribbons from the amice and the alb and the chasuble, and they do the shield of the Carmelite. They do the rosary. They do the Cairo. They do the Sacred Heart with thorns and flame, because it's important to them. It is important to them. And when I look at what they have done just to prepare my vestments, then I know that we're dealing with something that's so serious. I must give my best. And that starts with a prayerful commitment to say the black and do the red, and then especially give my A game to my preaching. I once received a very awkward compliment from a university president about my preaching. He said, Father's homilies are really unusual. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Well, what has he been listening to for all these years? And beauty is hard to argue against. When you see real beauty, when you hear real beauty, you can't say, I don't need that. Cut that out. No, no, no. It lifts up. And there was a time when we knew how to make beautiful churches, beautiful music, and beautiful saints. And I want to take all of that wisdom, not in some fanciful turn back the clock, nostalgia, good old days, but take that perennial wisdom and plant it in the soil of our here and now. It can be done, and it needs to be done.
Powerful. Very good. Well, that's probably a good place to pause for reflection. You certainly provided a lot upon which to ponder. Father McTeigue, thank you for joining us. I hope we can have you back to continue to help build the roadmap.
Glad to be of service. God bless your very good work. Please do pray for me.
Absolutely. As you get ready for Mass this Sunday, if you're Catholic, you're going to meet Jesus in the form of the Holy Eucharist. The Mass was handed down from generation to generation. It does not need modernity's polish or man's reinvention. Belief is spoken loudest by decorum. What does yours say? And the fight for truth, beauty, and goodness marches on. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Linda Hoffman. Look for our next exciting episode of Fear Not.
This has been a Chantworks production.